wins that state's electoral votes. So, for instance, President Obama won Virginia by 4 points last November, thereby earning all 13 of the state's electoral votes. But Republicans in Virginia, who control the state legislature and the governorship, now seem intent on changing the rules. The idea is to award one electoral vote per congressional district, along with a 2-vote bonus for winning the most districts. Under this formula, what had been a 13-0 Obama sweep of Virginia last year would have become a 9-4 Romney triumph. This is actually part of a trend. Republicans, thanks to the wave election of 2010, control governorships and state legislatures in a number of big blue states. And now, with the GOP's national chairman cheering them on, Republicans in many of these states are talking more and more about pursuing similar rules changes. The effect could be massive. Currently, 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, award electoral votes by congressional district. Each is small, and only once in Nebraska in 2008 has it resulted in an electoral vote going to a candidate who didn't win the statewide popular vote. But the math changes in bigger states where Democratic voting populations are jammed into a handful of districts in metropolitan areas, while Republican voters are more widely dispersed across the state. So apply the Maine-Nebraska model to all 50 states, and Mitt Romney would have won the electoral vote 276 to 262 last November, even as he lost the national popular vote by 5 million votes. There is a lot to talk about here, so let's spin on it. And I think the first thing is the point to appreciate about why a move like this would work so much in the Republican Party's favor is that sort of ideologically and sort of in terms of partisan identity, the country is really sorting itself out geographically. And the Democratic coalition, we've talked about the rising Democratic coalition, non-white, young, college-educated, that sort of thing. That rising Democratic coalition, more than ever, is packed into metropolitan areas. And so you'll have overwhelming Democrats. Take a big state that might have 15 electoral votes. You'll have, 3 or 4 congressional districts where you'll have overwhelming Democratic majorities, 80, 90%. But then you'll end up having like 9 or 10 districts across the state where Republicans, have about 60%, we'll say. So take that together, it's enough for the Democrats to win the state. But when you break it down by congressional district, Republicans start racking up some pretty significant majorities. That's what you would see if you had this model in Pennsylvania and Ohio and in Virginia, all of these other states. And it really, it speaks to that. That's the statistic I've always cited, I think, on this show before, is to appreciate this evolution. In 1988, Michael Dukakis, who got clobbered by George Bush Sr., won over 800 counties in this country. Barack Obama this year, winning by 5 million votes, won fewer than 700. That's how tightly condensed that the Democratic votes become. For me, the bottom line has always been simple. I've been saying this for years, and I'm going to keep saying this until I die or until they change it. Most votes in an election should win. I want a national popular vote. Yeah. I don't believe all the arguments against it add to much. Whoever gets the most votes nationally wins, period, end of story.
Well, and I think that's something we all actually agree on, just to make it the
Even
popular
just for the
vote.
sake of ease.
Seriously. I mean, the current system we have doesn't make any sense. And the other dynamic that plays into this, of course, is how well Republicans did, particularly in state legislatures in 2010, gave them control of the redistricting process, gave them control of a lot of these state legislatures that went blue. So Virginia, again, at the state level, House and Senate controlled by Republicans, governorship controlled by Republicans, but obviously went blue. But something to take note of here that is absolutely incredible is prior to 2008, prior to President Obama winning Virginia in 2008, a Democrat had not won Virginia for 44 years. LBJ was the last Democrat to win at the national level in Virginia in 44 years for the presidency. So basically with this plan, Republicans are giving up. They're saying, we can't win Virginia. We can't win it the way that it is. We've got to do these tricks to try to get back our advantage. That's incredible, because if you're losing Virginia for the presidency, you're losing, period. So I think that's an incredible thing to take note of. And one other thing, the Virginia Republicans have been quite busy this week. On Monday, during the president's inauguration, a civil rights icon in Virginia, he was the first African-American mayor of Richmond, who also was a state senator, decided to attend the president's inauguration. And the Republicans in the Senate took advantage of his absence on MLK Day as well to push through a partisan, gerrymandered version of the state Senate districts. They made all the Democratic districts worse, and they were really targeting Creed Deeds, who was the state's the Democratic gubernatorial nominee last time around, who represents a very rural district. And if this new map becomes law, would actually lose his seat because of this. So they're really doing everything they can to sort of game the system in Virginia.
Well, I think a couple things. I think it should be noted that since the beginning of our young nation, Democrats have done some things to manipulate the system at times as well. Every party, minority, majority, wants to win, and they do what they have to win. It's not an excuse, it's just a fact. Two, I think some of this might be a little bit of hyperbole. Nebraska and Maine have been doing this for decades, and only once has a congressional district in either of those two states voted against the popular vote. Had this been the system in 2008 nationally, Obama still would have won, in fact, 301 to 237. But I want to say, optically, I don't know that this is something that I'm comfortable with. And I've sort of had to come around to this. I was reading something that Larry Sabato actually wrote in a column, his crystal ball column. We are working you into every topic we discussed today, Crystal.
He spelled crystal wrong, though.
Yeah. He wrote this, and I have to agree, Republicans face a choice that can best be characterized by personalizing it. A healthy, optimistic party is Reagan-esque, convinced that it can win the future by embracing it and by making a positive case for its philosophy and candidates to all Americans. A party in decline is Nixonian and fears the future. It sees enemies everywhere, feels overwhelmed by electoral trends, and thinks it can win only by cheating, by subverting the system and stacking the deck in its favor. I gotta say, at least optically, even if I disagree with some of those points, he's right. For exactly the reason why we're having conversations like this around this table, because it gives Democrats an opportunity to say they're cheating. And I'm actually incredibly optimistic about our party and about the future of conservatism. This isn't acting like it, and I'd rather we act a little bit more optimistic.
No, I think that's right.
I think to your point, I think the voting ID laws that were passed last time around in an attempt to do essentially the same thing really backfired on Republicans and created this atmosphere where people felt like they were trying to disenfranchise.
I mean, absolutely what you're saying and what you're saying about appearing fearful, it seems with voter ID and with this, that the GOP is trying to change the game rather than change their messaging. They're sort of saying, like, we can't win a state like Virginia, which is really important in a GOP constituency. And I mean, there's definitely something very fearful about conservatism right now, afraid of expanding liberty to lots of people.
Conservatism is not fearful.
No, absolutely. Expanding liberty to people in terms of voter ID, in terms of immigration, all sorts of ways. In some ways, this is much ado about nothing. Just doing it in Virginia is not going to be enough. You're going to have to also do it in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan to really have an effect. There's 2 GOP state senators who say they're not going to vote for this, so it's going to have a hard time actually becoming law. And in terms of the Voting Rights Act, Virginia will have to go to the Justice Department and say, this is why this is not retrogressive for our black voters in the state. And that's going to be an extraordinarily difficult case to make, because what it does is it takes power away from those in black districts. You talk about voters being smushed together and different things. Well, it totally takes power away.
Virginia will have to do that unless the Supreme Court steps in, and that's something we're going to be watching for the next year. Anyway, we took the same conversation to our Facebook friends with these kind of measures passed